This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells. The attacks were a colossal intelligence failure. The words of a top Sri Lankan government official admitting today that his government had intelligence reports warning of a terror attack but failed to act on them. Now, more than 24 hours after Islamic militants struck multiple targets on the island nation, Sri Lankans are struggling to come to grips with their nation's worst terror attack in a decade. CBN's international correspondent George Thomas joins us with the latest. George?
Heather, with 290 dead and more than 500 injured, Sri Lanka is blaming the local jihadist group National Tawhid Jamaat for Sunday's horrific attack on churches and hotels, though no group has claimed responsibility. According to government officials, Sri Lanka's chief of national intelligence wrote a report on April 4th warning of an attack and even mentioned that the targets would be churches and tourist destinations. 5 days later, on April 9th, the country's Inspector General of Police was given another intelligence report with even names of the suspected terrorists. Yet, authorities did nothing to prevent the attacks. On Easter morning, around 8:45 local time, 7 Islamic suicide bombers in a near simultaneous and coordinated attack struck 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels in and around the capital city of Colombo. One of the largest explosions ripped through St. Anthony's Catholic Church just as congregants were filling the pews for Easter service. 39 foreigners were also killed, including at least 4 Americans and 8 British nationals. This morning, Sri Lanka's health minister apologized to his countrymen for failing to prevent the attacks, while the Archbishop of Colombo demanded answers.
As a government, we are responsible for all that, whether we know the situation or not know the situation. That's a different matter. The people are not concerned about that. Anyway, we are responsible. We are very sorry. And we apologize to everybody.
If there was prior information, why weren't steps taken to prevent this incident? It's a huge question for all of us, why it was allowed to happen.
A very important question. In the meantime, Sri Lankan security forces, as you can see there, are still carrying out searches across the island to find those behind the bombing. So far, 24 people have been arrested. Meanwhile, the terror suspects were reportedly planning even more carnage. Sri Lankan police discovered 87 bomb detonators at the main bus station in Colombo. And a van parked near one of the churches bombed on Sunday had 3 explosives in it. This morning, President Trump called Sri Lanka's Prime Minister to offer his condolences. This was Sri Lanka's deadliest bombing since a devastating civil war ended a decade ago. Heather?
Thank you, George. And joining us now with more is our senior international correspondent, Gary Lane. Gary, you've traveled to Sri Lanka,
yes,
and you've, over the years, watched persecution against Christians there, but it hasn't come from Muslims in the past. So talk more about the difference with this particular attack.
Well, that surprised everyone because there's only about 10% of the population in Sri Lanka that is Muslim. But most of the people, 70%, are Buddhists. A very small minority, only about 1.5%, are Christian. Christians being a minority of maybe only about 30,000 people, Heather, have been attacked in the past by militant Buddhists who don't like them converting Buddhists to Christianity. But they don't do bombings. They generally will go in and ransack churches. They'll threaten Christians. And a lot of the threats also come from family members of Buddhists who convert to Christianity, but rarely from Islam.
So why do we think now? Why are the Muslims striking now and on Easter Sunday?
Well, that's a good question because, look, I mean, there aren't that many Muslims in that country, 10%, as I said. But a pastor that I talked to today told me that one concern that there is the radicalization of Muslims in the mosques, that there's been a lot of talk about jihad and things like that. In addition to that, they've been free to go and travel overseas, also to places in India like Kashmir, Pakistan, places like that, where there are very militant Muslims. So were they influenced by these militants? Now, some people will say, look, this was a very sophisticated operation. It had resembled more of ISIS and their tactics. So were they influenced by ISIS? Were there ISIS agents also involved? We don't know at this point. That's being investigated, but it is a possibility.
Yeah, a lot still to investigate.
Yes.
And we know this is happening across Southeast Asia, really, persecution of Christians. Sure. I want to ask you, too, about the mainstream media coverage here in the U.S. It seems that our coverage is perhaps different from theirs. Talk about that.
Well, our coverage is different because we will call it like it is. I noticed within about 24 hours there was a hesitancy from the part of the mainstream media in America to call this Islamic terror. Now, maybe that's because they didn't know, but I think they just say, oh, this is an act of terrorism. As far as the Christians, they rarely say these were Christians worshiping, this is sectarian violence, or this is just people worshiping at Easter time.
Right. And I want to ask you, too, it seems to me that we really have seen this before on Easter, other religious holidays. Is that indeed a trend?
Yes, it is a trend. It happens regularly in places like Egypt and Pakistan. Remember in Egypt back in 2016, just before Christmas time, there was a bombing at the cathedral in Cairo, another bombing in Egypt and at Palm Sunday in 2017. That was in Alexandria, another one in Tanta. That claimed almost 50 lives there. And then also, Heather, often in Pakistan. We remember just a couple years ago, Palm Sunday bombings, twin bombings of churches there. And then the following year at a park when Christians were celebrating Easter after their services.
Yeah, really sobering to think that Christians need to be vigilant on Easter and on Christmas.
All holidays, and coming up, Ramadan. That is also a time when Christians need to be on their guard.
All right, Gary Lane, thanks for your insights. Sure. Well, in other news, more pressure on the Iranian oil industry. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced today that the U.S. will not renew sanction waivers for 5 countries that receive oil from Iran. Pompeo says President Trump has decided not to reissue waivers, which expire May 2nd, to Japan, South Korea, Turkey, China, and India. That means those nations will no longer be exempt from U.S. sanctions if they're still importing oil from Iran. Pompeo has been saying the goal has always been to get countries to stop importing Iranian oil entirely.
We're going to zero across the board. We will continue to enforce sanctions and monitor compliance. Any nation or entity interacting with Iran should do its diligence and err on the side of caution. The risks are simply not going to be worth the benefits. I want to emphasize that we have used the highest possible care in our decision to ensure market stability.
Pompeo also said the U.S. does not expect any significant reduction in the supply of oil here, given production increases by other countries. And we will have more stories like this from our Washington bureau this evening on Faith Nation, and you can watch it here on the CBN News Channel. Well, the Supreme Court decided today that it will wade into the thorny issue of discrimination in the workplace. It will hear a trio of cases involving people who say they were fired because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. At issue, whether the 1964 federal civil rights law that prohibits employment discrimination also applies to sexual orientation and gender identity. One of those cases involves a male Michigan funeral home employee who asked for permission to dress as a woman at work. Another involves a gay skydiving instructor who challenged his dismissal. And a third case pertains to a social worker who said he was fired because of his sexual orientation. Joining us now with more is Jim Campbell with Alliance Defending Freedom, or ADF. ADF represents the Michigan funeral home that is defending its refusal to continue to employ a male employee who identified as a woman to dress in women's clothing. And thanks so much for joining us, Jim.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Talk about the dress code, which is very important to the G.R. Harris Funeral Home. Why is it so important?
Well, it's important because the primary goal of Harris Funeral Homes is the grieving families that they serve. And so they put in place these policies to ensure professionalism, to ensure that their employees blend into the background, and to ensure that grieving families can focus on each other and their grief.
So why did the funeral home not allow its employee to dress as a woman? Would it have allowed it if the employee was fully transitioned?
Well, in this situation, they have this policy. It's a sex-specific policy. Men dress a certain way, women dress a certain way, and they put that in place again in order to serve the interests of their customers. So under these circumstances, the owner, Tom Ross, determined that the request of this employee was not in the best interest of the grieving families that they served. But nevertheless, he wanted to do right by this employee, so he offered him a severance package, which the employee refused, and instead, Harris Funeral Homes has been battling the EEOC for the last nearly 6 years because the federal government's been targeting them simply to make a political point.
Why do you think the Supreme Court decided to take this particular case and the other two now?
Well, it's an important question whether unelected officials at the EEOC can unilaterally redefine federal law in order to bring about their political goals. Here, we're dealing with a term that's been in the law for over 50, 60 years. We're dealing with the word sex. And taking the word sex and replacing it with gender identity has widespread consequences in the law. For example, doing that would jeopardize the dignity and privacy rights of women by opening privacy facilities like locker rooms and restrooms and shower facilities to men who identify as women. It would also undermine educational and sports opportunities for girls by opening those opportunities to boys who identify as girls. So there's a number of issues that are raised here, and these are important questions that the people should be able to decide for themselves and not have unelected officials decide it for them.
Really, so much at stake here. What is the timeline of this case at this point in time? When might it be heard? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, the court will likely hear arguments in the fall, maybe as late as the winter, but probably October, November argument. And then the court will likely decide the case sometime next year in the spring or even in the summer.
Case Jim Campbell with Alliance Defending Freedom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And a reminder to check out our CBN News Daily Rundown podcast with Caitlin Burke. She gives a behind-the-scenes look at a key story in the news every day, and you can find it at cbnnews.com on the show tab. Click on its title to listen and subscribe. Coming up, we speak with evangelist Franklin Graham and hear what his ministry is doing to help the crisis in Venezuela.
CBN presents The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
We're going to talk about some of the incredible promises God has made to His children.
In Pat Robertson's newest teaching, you'll discover the I Wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation, and see amazing stories of God's promises in action.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Break free from stress and despair.
The Lord doesn't want you to live in fear, but to know the rewards given to those who love God.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit cbn.com. The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Welcome back. We have been reporting for some time now on what is happening in Venezuela as that country continues to deteriorate both economically and politically. Amidst this, there is news that many Venezuelans are turning to faith as their limits are tested. Evangelist Franklin Graham spoke this Easter weekend to Venezuelan refugees in the border city of Cúcuta, Colombia, and joins us now with more. Reverend Graham, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I understand that you joined with hundreds of churches in Cúcuta to welcome refugees from Venezuela to services this weekend in the city's soccer stadium. Tell us about who came and what happened.
Well, first of all, let me back up. I was down there back in October visiting these refugees coming out of Venezuela into Colombia. They come over 1,000, sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 people per day. And they're not allowed to bring their vehicles. They just walk. And they bring their suitcase, pull it behind them, and they walk from there all the way to Bogota. Some spend weeks on the road pulling their suitcase behind them. They're just fleeing. And at that time, I just felt in my heart, we need to do something for these refugees coming here into Colombia. We set up an aid station right there at the border where we give medical attention to people that are coming across the border. And then as they go over the mountains, we have little Samaritan inns kind of places where a person can stop. We have food for them. We have, again, health care. We are able to give them antibiotics, those kinds of things if they need it. We care for the children. Give them clothing. It gets cold up in the mountains.
Great needs.
As they
I
cross
do want to
Andes.
ask you in particular about the services this weekend, because we know that, we're not hearing a lot spiritually about what is going on. So what are you seeing in terms of the spiritual needs of the people, and what happened at the services?
Well, when we started this back in October, I just felt in my heart God wanted us to come and hold like a crusade in the city. And so we talked to the churches. I want to do this in January. They said, no, let's do it Easter weekend. I said, okay, we'll do it Easter weekend. And it was more than I ever expected. We had about 116,000 people come to our 3 meetings. We had around 7,000 or so make decisions for Jesus Christ. The hunger was incredible. The entire city was behind what we're doing. The mayor's office, the police, the military, everybody was behind this festival we did this past week. And it was just something God did. So we give Him the glory. The physical needs, I think, of the people, God sometimes uses that to open up the hearts spiritually. And that's what I was trying to say with all the people coming across into Colombia, suffering as they come into the country. It just opens up a door to preach the gospel. We started off by praying for the president of Venezuela, that God would open up his eyes and open up his heart, that he would change some of these policies. We prayed for the president of Colombia as well. But there is no question a great spiritual need among the people, not only of Colombia, because he just came out of a civil war too. We have to remember they've had a terrible civil war, and that has just ended. And so the people are just still reeling from that. And now we see what's happening in Venezuela next door.
Yeah, well, I am really heartened to hear the spiritual report. Yeah, that is wonderful to hear. And I also just want to ask you politically, we know that the Russian military is involved in Venezuela, supporting that government there, and there's been talk of outside military intervention that may be needed from the U.S. to take out the country's dictator. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's the Russians are there in a very small way. I don't think that's really an issue. It's really the Cubans. The Cubans have taken control of the country, and they have taken control of this government. They've taken control of the military. I've been told that all the advisors, the top leadership of the Venezuelan military are Cubans now. So it's almost like Cuba has annexed the country. And this is so sad. You know, Cuba is a basket case. And now Venezuela, which had the largest middle-class economy in all of Latin America, the largest oil reserves in the world is in Venezuela. And to see this country now reduced to poverty is just, it breaks your heart, especially when you see somebody pulling a suitcase for weeks just to leave. And I saw women and children pulling their little suitcases hundreds of miles from Cúcuta up in the mountains. it breaks your heart.
We've got to wrap, but I do want to ask you, would you support the U.S. if the government decided to get militarily involved?
Well, I don't think that's a place for me to give a comment, because Samaritan's Purse is going to help the people of Venezuela regardless of who they are. We're going to help all of them. And I hope that there is a political solution soon without any military conflict. That would be my hope and my prayer.
Well, I know we are all thinking and praying for the people of that country and appreciate what you're doing. Reverend Graham, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
And don't go anywhere. We will be back right after the break.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
You know, I think as a father, it's my job, to lead. Just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Superbook fans, here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
Millsburg Falls man.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes too, and so much more. Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon. It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
Discover the I wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit CBN.com. The I wills of God, the latest teaching from Pat Robertson.
And welcome back. Calls to impeach are flooding through Washington as Democrats and Trump supporters are at odds over key parts of the Mueller report. The recently released 448-page document lays out 11 instances of possible obstruction of justice, indicating President Trump was thwarted by aides like White House counsel Don McGahn, who refused to follow his directives.
Do you believe Don McGahn when he says the president tried to get him to fire Bob Mueller?
I believe the president was frustrated about the investigation from the very beginning and knew it was ill-conceived.
According to a new Media Research Center report, mainstream media mentioned impeachment more than 300 times during its coverage of the Mueller report from Thursday afternoon to Friday morning. And joining us now is Scott Whitlock, the associate editor for Newsbusters at the Center. Scott, thanks for joining us. Are you surprised by the media's reaction, or did you expect it?
No, I'm not surprised at all. Journalists in the media, particularly on CNN and MSNBC, have spent 2 years pushing this impeachment talk. That's basically been the goal from the very beginning. And so it's basically a letdown for what they expected and what they wanted, but they're not going to let it go. Yeah, we looked at the media coverage on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC over just 18 hours, and there were 309 mentions or discussions of impeachment just on Thursday alone.
Why do you think that is such a fixation for them?
Well, look, I think the narrative has been from the very beginning that there was collusion and obstruction. We saw this pushed by liberals within the Democratic Party and echoed by liberals within the mainstream media. And it's that kind of boy who cried wolf syndrome where you do it too many times and people kind of tune you out. So I think that is what may be happening with the American public, but not on the media. They are going to keep fixated on this, and they really are the echo chamber for the activist part of the Democratic Party. You have Elizabeth Warren.
Do you see this impeachment drumbeat continuing, or where do you see it going next?
Yeah, I absolutely see it continuing because look again, you have people like Elizabeth Warren who are pushing this narrative. And despite the fact that you have other liberals who are kind of giving the cautious signs, such as Nancy Pelosi, they don't want to let this go because that's what the base wants. And we're just seeing that echoed in all these different media outlets and cable channels.
All right. Well, Scott Whitlock with Newsbusters, we appreciate your insights and your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And after the break, what special group of heroes were recognized during yesterday's Easter Mass in Paris?
As the world watches from the outside,
it's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
It has the power to influence weight loss, boost your immune system, and improve brain function.
We've seen an explosion of data on the role of the gut microbiome in health.
The free Build a Better Gut booklet reveals the latest information about the gut microbiome. You'll discover how your gut affects the rest of your health.
The gut microbiome has been linked to depression and cancer and heart disease.
Learn how to build a stronger, healthier gut.
The microbiome, if it's in good composition, are really protecting us all the time from more invasive things.
Get the Build a Better Gut booklet, free from the Christian Broadcasting Network. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/buildabettergut.
You need to make sure that your microbes are working with you, not against you.
And if you order online, you'll get immediate access to the Build a Better Gut series, a digital copy of the booklet, and related bonus material. Build a Better Gut today. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/buildabettergut for your free copy.
A special Easter Mass in Paris yesterday honored the firefighters who saved the Notre Dame Cathedral. Paris Archbishop Michael O. Petit thanked multiple city officials for their support during last Monday's fire. Firefighters worked for 9 hours to contain flames that consumed Notre Dame's roof and collapsed its spire. Catholics from around the world prayed over the firefighters Sunday, praying for a swift reconstruction of the beloved monument. The fire service chaplain was recognized for saving a chalice containing consecrated hosts that for Catholics are the body of Christ. And that is it for this edition of Newswatch. We hope that you will join us next time. Have a great day.